Every episode celebrates original content written by real people who experience real emotions. I'm Rayanne Thorne-Kruger. Welcome to Real Words. My guest today is, I have to say, one of the funniest people I've ever met in my life.
Oh no, there's so much pressure.
So much pressure now. Nate Makaryk, I think I first met you actually post an improv show in Fullerton, California. You were part of a troupe. I don't know if you're still doing it. Maybe you pop in every now and then, but Improv Shmimprov. I don't know if I said that right.
Yeah, you got
At the Maverick Theater in Fullerton, California. And then I discovered that you were also a playwright and now an established author. Why don't you give us a quick rundown of your accomplishments, what you do to make money?
Sure. Yeah, the real accomplishments.
The real accomplishments, and then we'll jump right in. And welcome to Real Words, Nate.
Thank you. I'm a real person with real emotions doing real
Love
things.
that.
We do still do Shmimprov. So I've been managing Improv Shmimprov, which is a long-running improv group here in Orange County, California, for over 20 years now, which I think makes us one of the longest-running improv groups ever in existence. We obviously went down for the pandemic for a while, but we came back afterwards. We used to do. Back when you saw we were doing shows once or even twice a week. These days we only do it once a month because we're all old and have kids now. But yeah, it's still going strong. My day job, which is exciting to some humans but not exciting to most humans, is I'm the director of training for a company called Q-SYS, which does networked audio, video, and control software management, and I teach people how to use our stuff. So if that sounds really technical, it is, and if it sounds really boring, my job is to try to make it less boring. And I'm generally, I think, pretty successful at that, which is why I've been there for 13 years, and that's going great too.
That's fabulous. I didn't know that. I will bet that you use humor in your training.
Very much so. Yeah, we actually we sort of became a benchmark in the industry for how training can be good or better than what training usually is, especially in our industry, in the AV world. Training is usually unbelievably dry and difficult to get through. So we use a lot of humor in our videos and in our live classes, and people take to that. And we've seen some people try to recreate that, but we've kind of lucked out because me and my boss, Patrick, who is also a member of Shmimprov, we've got a comedy background. We've been doing comedy together for a decade. So having that intuitively as part of your training discipline is kind of invaluable. So that's going great.
I love that. That's fantastic. So here you are, now an author. How did you go from being somebody who conducts training videos and a very successful improv performer, actor, playwright? How did you go to writing a book? Two books.
I know that I got lucky there. That developed from the theater side of things. So the Maverick Theater that you mentioned, I've been a part of since near the beginning. And I used to direct shows every now and then, usually like once a year or so. I directed less now that I'm a father, but back then I was directing, and one of the years, my partner Brian said he was pitching shows for me to do, and usually most of my shows have always involved some degree of sword play because I'm also a combat choreographer, so I enjoy making shows with lots of swords and action sequences. And he proposed the idea of doing a Robin Hood script, and my first reaction was to say, I don't really like Robin Hood. That's not really my deal. And he said, well, why don't you write your own version? And I hadn't really thought about that before. I had tinkered with some scripts before, but I generally hadn't really rewritten anything. I wrote a lot in college and I wrote a lot in high school. I've written, plenty of plays along the way, but I never thought about writing something new for the Maverick. And so I said, okay, that sounds like a great idea. I'll do that. I will write a Robin Hood script. So I wrote a play, which was called The Legend of Robin Hood. And we did that in about a year's time, and it came off very successfully. And a lot of people said, hey, what are you going to do with this script? That script was great. What are you going to do with it next? And I sort of realized that the proper venue for it as much as I loved the theatrical production, was that I wanted to expand it, and I couldn't expand it without going into the world of novels. So I just said, you know what, I'm going to write a book. I'll turn it into a novel. See what happens. I had
Wow.
just had a friend of mine get published, and until that point, I think I had always, because I actually I had written a book before too, back like in high school or something like that. I always enjoyed writing. Um, I had always assumed that in order to become a writer, one must spend one's entire life in the pursuit of becoming a writer, and you have to go to college to be a writer, and you have to go to be approved to be a writer in some way. But then I had a friend who, she just wrote a book and she got it published, and I was like, hey, how'd you do that? Are you allowed to just do that? That's a thing. And so I sat her down and she talked me through it, and I said, I think I could maybe do that too. I mean, foolishly, it's still a really hard industry to get involved with. But first step is to write. So I just sat down and spent a year or so writing it out, and I got really
That's
lucky.
that's wonderful. I know that I've spoken with many writers, and one of the first pieces of advice they ever receive is just start.
Yeah,
Just
yeah.
start.
You can't do anything until you've got a product, right? There's no
Right.
point, and I mean, I think it works for many practices, but they say the best time to get started is 10 years ago, but the second best time is today, right? So just
Right. It's
start.
kind of the whole old adage of planting a seed. If you want a tree, you got to start. You have to plant that seed or that
Yeah.
sapling. So you've said that you were a writer, have been a writer most of your life, all of your life. What drove you to write as a young person or a child?
Ooh, that's a good question. I don't really know. I think, I mean, I enjoyed reading, and when you read, you want to do more of that. Um, I just naturally kind of enjoyed it as an introvert who sometimes is an extrovert by going on stage. Spending time you spend a lot of time in your own head, anyways. So
Right.
you like being at home and living in your own world. So that's an easy way to live when you're otherwise enjoying living in your cave.
So I see two books behind you,
Correct. They were
Nottingham and Lionheart, and these grew out
they
of
just
the
barely
the
made it
legend.
into the frame.
There,
Yes.
I see them.
Yes. So the first book, Nottingham, is the development of the play. Went from Legend of Robin Hood to become Nottingham, and then during the process of writing and trying to get an agent and trying to get published, I started tinkering around with the sequel. And when I finally got an agent and when I finally got a book deal, the publishers essentially said, "Hey, we're gonna book. We're gonna assign you for two books. Do you want it to be a sequel? Do you want the second one to be something else entirely?" And I said, "Yeah, I've already been tinkering with a sequel, so let's do the sequel." Um,
Wonderful.
and so that was the sequel took much longer to write than the first one, sadly. But yeah, it was that I learned is a fairly common process, of fairly common practice, I should say, in the publishing world. In that, publishers want to make money off of you. Obviously, it's the business. And so, if they only book you for one book and it's a success, then they've got to go back and renegotiate and get a contract for number two. So it's pretty common. I would, more than half of writers who get published will get a contract for two or more books. Two is pretty common because then if the first one's a success, boom, they can follow it up with the second one real quick while you're popular, while you're hot. They can make even more money off that second one. If your first book tanks, well, guess what? They'll publish the second one. They just won't put any effort behind it, right? It'll be a low book run. It'll be low publicized. They'll fulfill their contractual obligation to get the second one out there. But it's, essentially they're hedging their bets that every now and then they're going to have that really successful first book, and the second book then can follow up really quickly. So, I say I'm lucky that I got that, but in reality, it's not uncommon at all.
So your journey to become an author, to go from training videos to stage combat to writing plays and then these books. When you consider your journey to where you are as a published author of two books, successful books, do you have any advice for somebody who hasn't even started yet or who has dreamed of being published?
I have I mean, we could spend hours on this. Yes, I have so much advice. I actually, one of the things I've really enjoyed about this process is that I've been invited to speak rather frequently at Writers Digest conventions to
Great.
writers that are budding and trying to break into the industry. Again, I think that's a byproduct of the fact that since I'm also a performer, I tend to be a little bit more entertaining than the average writer. A lot of not I'm clearly not going to poo-poo on writers in general, but generally writers tend to be, again, more soft spoken and live in their world and not used to speaking in front of a crowd. So I've had a lot of success in also being a writer who speaks at those events. And some of the things, some of the courses that I give are basically hour or two, just here's advice on
Wow.
where are you at and what should you look forward to, what can you do. So yeah, I can talk a lot about advice for writers. Like some of the most common things that I really like to reinforce with writers. First one, for more than anything, is to keep in mind that your success is in no way tied to your value as a person or the value or quality of your writing. And that's a sad thing to get over, but it's really, really hard because so many people, when they get rejections, they think, oh, my writing is terrible, or oh, I'm not worthy of getting this. And sadly, it's not true. There's so much in the industry that is, you're out of your control. That is luck based, or you're getting the agent at just the right day, or you're falling into that niche of some a project that a publisher is looking for they would have passed on the day earlier. There's so much that you can't control. Like 90% of it, I'm hoping that you'll get successful, is out of your control. The only things you can control is whether or not your writing is good, right? So do your best writing, and then somehow have the resiliency to let all the rejections not affect you, not get you down. Believe in yourself. You may never get published. I mean, odds are, unfortunately, that you probably won't. But that doesn't mean that you're not a good person. It doesn't mean that your writing sucks. It just means that it didn't work out for you, and that's terrible and it's hard. But it's also really important to not let it get you down. The opposite is also true. If you do get published, that doesn't mean that your writing is great, and it doesn't mean that you're a great person. We've all seen books or movies or anything that we see and we go, that's trash. How did that get created? Who said
Right.
yes to that, right? And
Right.
and it's a double-edged sword, because you see that and then you think to yourself, well, if that got created and mine isn't, boy, that must mean mine's even more terrible than I thought it was. But
Right.
that's not true either, right? That person just got really lucky. That person had the right connection, or that person, fell into the right cracks. So that's also really hard to see projects that you think are not worthy, for in the kindest way probably to phrase it, see success when the projects that you think are worthy, including your own, don't see success. It can be brutal. And for writers, I think writers in general are usually a bit more sensitive to those kinds of feelings of self-doubt, and imposter syndrome and all those things.
Right.
So boy, it's a real rough industry, where we're basically saying, hey, let's take all the most sensitive people in the world and just constantly batter them with rejection, and see who survives. It's
Ugh,
hard.
it's so hard. It is so hard. And writing, whatever it is, whether you're writing a blog post, copy for a website, or a novel, a play, it's I have described it like giving birth, because I have put everything, all of me, into what I have produced. And when somebody comes back with a negative, like, you should get an editor,
Uh-huh.
or or did you really read what you wrote, right? Or the the responses that are no,
Yeah.
the no responses. And then you really start to self-doubt, and then you think, well, should I just self-publish because I think it's great? And I've
Mhm.
gone back and read stuff that I wrote 20 years ago, and it was crap. It was,
Like,
so
I wasn't good. That's a good
I
point.
wasn't good. I really did need an editor. So how do you get over that? How do you get over the fact that you have to polish the rock? It's not going to be perfect. that first time? And I know that you probably had dozens of rewrites
Oh,
and
oh yeah.
feedback from your publisher, right?
Oh
So
goodness, yes.
so how do you get over that fact and not become just defeated?
I mean, the second part, I have no answer for you. The first part is yes. The reality is that there's no such thing as perfection, and you will never walk away thinking that it was 100%. What you could sit down and write something right now and think that it's 100%. You come back to it tomorrow and you read it and you think it's crap, like you just said with your own work 20 years ago, right? That's always going to be true. It doesn't, no matter what, your writing is a byproduct of the mood that you're in and what you're feeling at the moment, and outside factors, and how you feel the blueprints to get to someone's emotions weave within your own brain, and hoping that it works for someone else. That changes on a day-to-day or month-to-month process. So I mean, you go back and read your own stuff, you're always going to want to change it. You're always going to want to adapt this or that. And that's true, for editing any length of thing. For a novel, it's really hard because you're editing that thing potentially for years. And the you that is editing that at any point could be vastly different than the you that edited it last time. And so you're going to read a chapter that you thought was perfect before, and now you're like, no, this doesn't work. But it did work. It did work for you in the past. It doesn't work for you now. It might, you change it and it works for you now. It might not work for you 3 years from now when you go back and read it again and pick it off the shelf. So you have to be okay with the fact that it will never be perfect, because that's not a possible goal. The goal is to get it to a place that you're happy with today, and hope that that connects with the people who are most like you in the person that you're at today. And it might not connect with everyone, and it's not going to connect with everyone, and that's fine. It's not for everyone. You can't write something that's for everyone. All you can do is write something that's true for yourself, and then hope that it does indeed connect with enough people that that they'll enjoy it. And then you ignore everyone else. You just, I mean, every author will tell you don't read the reviews, but also every author has to learn that for themselves. There's no way when you first put your book out in the world that you're just going to say, no, I'm not going to look at the reviews. Of course you're going to look at the reviews. You've spent years on this thing. You can't wait for people to say yes to it. The problem is when you see good reviews, all that does is reinforce your own feelings, right? It says, oh, that person got what I was going for. Awesome. I was right. That feels good. But it doesn't teach you anything new about it. It just makes you say, all right, cool, I got that person. Whereas all the negative reviews, all of those just everything is about, well, they should have done this, or it didn't work for me. Well, yeah, you're not learning anything from that either. You don't end up learning anything from either of the reviews. You get a little bit of bump from the good reviews, but the bad bump you get from the bad reviews,
It's not worth
it's
it.
not worth it. Not worth
It's
it.
not
But
worth it.
you got to learn that for yourself, because eventually, you read. I mean, like from my experience, you read 100 good reviews, and they're all the same. They're all, hey, this is great. And you're like, yay. The bad reviews are always something new and fresh. You're like, oh, really? That's what they're complaining about, or something like that. So it just ends
Oh
up
my
not being
gosh.
there's no profit in going back and seeing those reviews after you've saturated yourself with the good ones.
That's amazing. My guest today is Nathan Makaryk. He's here on Real Words. He's an improv performer and now an author. How long did it take you to write Nottingham?
Ooh, it took the novelization of that took about a year, so 1 year to write essentially the first draft.
And that was
Um,
from the play that you wrote to the novel.
Correct. So in that way, I had a lot of advantage because I had already written the play. That took me a couple months to write, but then that also meant I had months of working that play, working with the
Workshopping it.
actors
Yes.
in that
Yes.
play, developing it with them, and forming it into a really good form. Doing the sound design, doing set design. That meant that I had all of this work in my head before I started writing down the book. I knew everything about where it was going to go. I didn't have to outline it, or I mean, I did. I fleshed it out significantly more, but the story was there, the emotion was there. I knew what the story was. So that counts as part of the writing process, clearly, because normally you don't get to just start from scratch with
Right.
that. But once I chose to, from first fingers on the keyboard to when I had a draft, it was about a year. Then there was at least 6 months of editing before I was querying. Once I started querying for literary agents, it was 2 years before I got an agent. And in that time, I was revising more. I was working on the sequel sometimes. Once I got an agent, it was 2 more years before I got a book deal,
Wow.
where the agent was able to get a publisher to say yes. And once I got the book deal, it was a little more than 2 more years before it was on a shelf. So it can be a long process. Now, my experience was longer than most.
That's a
For
long gestation.
It was a
That's
yes,
really a long.
yeah. Most authors will usually get if they're going to get an offer, they'll get an offer usually after about 6 months of the agent pitching out to publishers. So for mine being 2 years, that was unusual. And I know why it was unusual. And this is another thing that I often suggest to budding writers is to make sure that you're writing something that falls within the guidelines of what is marketable and required. There's guidelines on how long word count wise any given book should be in different genres. My book was way outside of that. When I wrote the first draft of Nottingham, it was 300,000 words. And the reason it was 300,000 words is because that's the kind of book that I like to read. I like to read Game of Thrones style books, right? So if that's what I like to read, that's what I want to write. And then once I started, after I finished it, then I did the research on the industry and discovered that like a debut historical fiction or fantasy should be more like 90 to 120,000 words. And I'm clearly 3 times that. So one of the things I'd like to suggest is do the research first, find out what is reasonable within your genre and aim for that. Now, that's not to say that it isn't possible to be successful. Clearly, I was lucky and got successful, even though with the revisions, the first book ended up still being around 225, which is still easily twice as long as it should have been for a debut. So I had a lot of people willing to take a risk on me, which is rare, which is where a lot of those 2 years fell into, because it landed in a lot of hands of people saying, "Hey, I like it, but it's too long. It's outside of what's reasonable." And again, it's a business. So publishers and agents, they know what is potentially most likely going to be successful, and that's where these recommendations come from, right? If you're too far outside of that, then the publisher's spending too much of their resources on editing and on working with you for a book that is not guaranteed to make them any money. And so they're probably wasting that time. Why wouldn't they go with some other author who wrote a reasonably length novel? Because the odds to them are just the same, that one might be a success versus yours. So knowing the industry, giving them something that falls into the lines of what it is they're likely to be asking for is pretty important. It's not impossible. It's just adding giant obstacles or extra hurdles in front of yourself that you didn't need to. I ended up putting way too many hurdles in front of myself that I didn't need to, and that ended up costing me in the form of time over the long run. So that's something to be really scared of.
It sounds. I don't want to put too much into it because I'm formulating myself. The next thing I want to do.
Yep.
And I don't want to scare myself. I don't want you to scare me. So did you just write on Word doc? What did you use software? Okay.
Yeah, I just use Word. I don't. Scrivener's the other real common one for writers, but I just use use Word.
Great. So one of the core reasons of course, I love talking to authors and creators. One of the core reasons I launched this show and this website is because of the prevalence of AI and technology and the growth that we're seeing. I mean, every platform you go on, if you can write a post underneath it, it says, "Write this with AI."
Yeah.
Right? Or so everyone has opportunity to utilize AI. And I have a concern that we might be dumbing down creators. And by that, I mean maybe making them a little bit lazy.
Mm-hmm.
So do you think that creativity is at risk because of AI and the fast movement forward we have in the world of technology right now?
I mean, at risk for sure. I don't think we're far away from starting to see scripts and books that are AI generated at all.
Right.
And
Right.
in the beginning, that might very well be the selling piece, thing saying, "Hey, here's what. Take a look at this. Read it, and and be surprised by it." And then years after that, will you know it all? I don't know. Um, I mean, right now, I definitely see people using AI for editing purposes, which is I don't necessarily think is the worst thing in the world. I haven't been using it, but I've seen some people say, "Hey, I'm going to take my chapter, plop into Chat GPT, and say clean up the grammar and whatnot." And for some people when grammar is not your greatest strength,
Right.
awesome, good. Honestly, good for you, especially for self-published writers who might not have access or funds for a professional editor, and their book ends up coming off a little bit better than they could have otherwise. Go for it. I think that's useful. Um, the How far we are away from having just fully AI generated content, and hopefully we will see a backlash against it, kind of the way we do a little bit already
Right.
in movies and things like that. We've seen people like, oh, people will use AI generated imagery in their movie posters, and we see people say, hey, no, that wasn't cool, don't do that. Maybe that's just in my Facebook feeds. Maybe
No,
other people don't care.
I'm seeing it too. Also, I've noticed this several new shows that have come out on the streaming services that the intros have all been
Mhm.
generated via AI, and I skip the intro now. I don't want to see it. It's not creative.
Yeah.
It doesn't
It,
look
it
interesting to
it
me at
still
all.
it feels very fake now, but it's not. But it eventually won't. It eventually will
Well,
feel
remember the
real.
aha video for Take on Me?
Uh huh.
How cool that was, and we
Yeah.
loved that going in and out of the real world and the the drawn word, the art world. I don't want it anymore. Let's keep it in aha. Let's keep it
I
in the
mean,
80s.
yeah, I think that a lot of people are fans, even like when it comes to movies, like the difference between CGI and practical effects, and practical effects are always better. And hopefully that will continue to be the case with content across the board. We know that it's cheaper to do CGI. We know it's cheaper to do AI. Um, uh, I guess we're the stewards as a public to decide whether or not
Yes.
we want to market that, and choose for it to be something we're willing to pay for. Realistically, I think probably both paths will happen. We're going to see the easy things produced with AI. We're going to see the more human things produced human continually, and I doubt we'll ever completely replace that.
I love that word steward. I think it's so important to remember that in all aspects of our life, being humans, we have stewardship over a lot that happens on this earth. And so I appreciate you using that word. No one said that yet. So I really appreciate that.
I did at one point. I was on ChatGPT just playing around, and I was curious, and I have a full outline for what my third book in this series would have been had the pandemic not unfortunately stopped its progress. But I was curious in ChatGPT, and I was like, "What propose a plot for the third book in Nathan Makaryk's Nottingham series?" And it knew my books, and it proposed character paths and things like that. And I was shocked that it even had that content available to it.
Wow.
The plot wasn't great, and I would definitely not use it. But generally speaking, it knew the wide brushstrokes and stuff
Yeah.
like that. So I was pretty surprised.
Is there a screenplay in the works for him?
No, I wish. When it first came out, I did have a little bit of interest in that regard from a couple of from one main source, but it wasn't the right time, and also it came out again 6 months before the pandemic, and then a pandemic hit, and so everything ends. And
It did. Yeah.
yeah, and so like I mentioned, like my publisher or my editor at my publisher left in the pandemic times. So in the publishing world, that's basically kind of like a reset button for me, because now I don't have an advocate at the publisher,
Right.
and I got transferred to a new agent, but my new agent, or not, I'm sorry, not new agent, to a new editor, but the new editor doesn't know me, didn't edit these books, didn't fight for them for the last 4 years, and it's a pandemic, so he's like, yeah, we're gonna okay, nice to meet
Yeah.
you, and that
Yeah. So what's next? The third in the series. Are you starting that? Are you workshopping it? What's
uh,
going on there?
I very much would like to finish the third someday, even if I have to self-publish it, because the second one ends in some cliffhangers, and it ended in cliffhangers specifically because at the time I thought for sure the third book was essentially greenlit. Um, I literally turned into the final draft of the second book the week before the
Oh,
pandemic hit. So anyway, so I really want to write that book. That might have to happen later in life. My goal right now is I have two other books that I've written in the last 3 years.
mhm.
And I'm trying to get those a home. And those are a different genre. Those are sci-fi fantasy books. So I'm trying to find a home for those. And my long-term goal would be that if I do get those published, and if they're successful, then maybe that can reinvigorate interest in the first two books. And then my publisher there will say, okay, let's make that third one happen after all.
So sci-fi, that seems more you to me than however, I did know that you
Yes.
wrote the play for Legend of was it the Legend of Robin Hood?
Yep.
Yeah. So I knew that you wrote that. So I knew that that was you had stepped into historical fiction.
Yeah, it was very funny when I was querying it out to realize that I had become a historical fiction author when that was never really my intent. In my mind, Robin Hood is much more like fantasy
Right.
than it's medieval and it's swords and it's castles. That feels like fantasy to me. But
There's some reality in there though. There's
yeah,
some truth in there.
but I did end up doing lots and lots of historical research for this, and in the end of the day, yeah, it ended up in the fiction shelf rather than the fantasy shelf because it's historical fiction. So that was very strange for me that I consider myself like a fantasy and sci-fi guy, but now I'm
For
a
sure.
historical fiction author.
That's I love that. So when Nate Makaryk was 9, 10 years old, was he an AV nerd? Did he roll that cart down the hall with the
I was
tapes
definitely
on
a computer nerd. I wasn't pushing the cart around. I wasn't the VCR guy, but I was always a computer nerd. I remember in must have been junior high or maybe elementary school. I remember we were playing Oregon Trail right back when that was cutting edge video
Oh
game
gosh,
technology.
I
Um,
remember that.
and it wasn't Oregon Trail. It was something like Oregon Trail, but it
It
was
was the I know what it was. It was in the jungle, right? Amazon, was it the Amazon one?
this one was with ships. I think it was like a sailing to the New World, something like that. But I remember that I like went into I kind of hacked into it in DOS and figured out where like how to win the game and stuff like that. So I was always that
Oh,
level of
fucking
nerd. Yeah,
hacker.
yeah.
Hacker. So with all this background in sci-fi and now you are a historical fiction guy, do you have a favorite author? Have you Who's your favorite?
I don't really have favorite anythings. I have like top fives of things, but I tend
Okay.
not to like gravitate to like a number one. But I mean, if you're asking specifically for like
Yeah,
sci-fi, I'll go Douglas Adams. I'll go Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy all year long, any day.
right.
I think a lot of my humor grew from that. I was reading that growing up, and I've always loved the dry wit of that. And the sci-fi novels that I did write have a lot of that feeling in them of just the real dry, irreverent sarcasm, which fingers crossed someone will like
Yeah.
and say yes to.
Well, my guest today has been the incomparable Nathan Makaryk. Just an amazing performer live. If you're in Southern California, look up Improv Shmimprov, and if you have a chance to go see him perform, he's incredible.
Well,
We've
thank you.
also, I mean, I've cracked on stage. We shared a stage together doing a really silly show called Santa Claus Conquers the Martians, and
Uh-huh.
Nathan, you can imagine him playing an evil Martian. It was overwhelming.
I still do
Many,
that every
many
year as
times.
well.
Oh, you do every
Every
year.
year. That's me up.
Oh, that's amazing. I need to get back and just come on stage for
Come
one
back,
weekend.
Momar.
I
We miss
need to
you.
coming back and be Momar. Thank you, Nate. Such a pleasure. I really appreciate you sharing your understanding of this world and your love of it. One of the best things about this project that I'm doing is just getting to get all of this advice and talk to these individuals that really are out there just providing and building and creating new content because of their love of it. And it clearly shines shines through in your words. And I can't thank you enough for coming and being a guest on Real Words.
Very, very happy you asked. I love this stuff. And I
Oh.
love helping people that need the help. Yeah.
If anybody wants to reach out to you, what's the best way?
First and last name, Nathan Makaryk at gmail.com. You got questions about the industry? You want me to look at your query? I'm 1,000% open to that. Every day. Reach out, please.
Amazing. Thank you, Nathan.
Thank
Bye
you.
all.
Bye.
Thanks for tuning in. This episode was made possible by Never Enough Media.